Kicked out at 15, she wedged her shelter under a rock overhang. Ephraim Cutter, who had survived 11 canyon winters and buried his wife to blizzard fever, told her, "That ledge will kill you cleaner than the open." She had $8, no bed to return to, and no way to build before winter. On January 9th, 1884, the temperature dropped 46 degrees in one day. But 4 months earlier, Marta Haugland had never built anything meant to last a winter. She had arrived in the canyon country in August of 1883 with flour paste still crusted under her fingernails from helping her stepmother bake. The woman had smiled at Marta that morning. By nightfall, that same woman had convinced Marta's father that the girl was old enough to make her own way. The conversation happened behind the wagon shed, and Marta heard it through the slat boards while she stacked kindling. "She eats as much as any of the boys," the stepmother said. "And what does she bring in? Nothing. She's not married. She's not promised. She's not working for wages anywhere that pays this household." Her father's voice came slower, tired. "She is my daughter. She is 15, old enough to find a situation, old enough to stop draining what little we have." The kindling pile grew. Marta's hands kept moving. She had learned that stillness drew attention, and attention in this household had stopped being safe 3 months after her mother died. "Where would she go?" her father asked. "That is not our concern. Give her what you can spare. Tell her to find work or find a husband. Either way, she stops eating from our stores." The silence stretched long enough that Marta almost believed her father would refuse. Then she heard his boots scrape against packed earth, moving away from the shed, and she knew. That night he gave her $8 in mixed coin, a flour sack, a borrowed axe with a loose head, a bent shovel, a skillet, an awl, a tin cup, and one blanket that had belonged to her mother. He told her not to come back unless she could carry her weight. She did not ask what carrying her weight meant. She already knew. It meant becoming someone else's problem. It meant marriage to whoever would take a girl with no dowry and no connections. It meant binding herself to labor in another household where she would answer to another woman who resented her presence. She walked instead. The canyon opened below the settlement road like a crack in a red earth. Marta had passed it twice before on supply trips with her father, back when her mother was alive, back when the household still felt like something she belonged to. The walls caught morning light and held it. The wash at the bottom ran dry this time of year, but cottonwoods and willows marked where water would flow after storms. She climbed down before she had a plan. The descent took most of the afternoon. By the time she reached the wash, the sky had turned the color of a healing bruise, purple and yellow at the edges. The overhang was not the first shelter she saw. There were shallow alcoves everywhere along the canyon walls, little scoops of eroded sandstone that might keep rain off a sleeping body for an hour or two. The overhang was different. First, it cut back 9 feet into the cliff face. It ran 14 feet wide. The floor was dry sand, packed hard, tilted slightly toward the mouth so water would drain out instead of pooling. She dropped her sack against the back wall and sat with her spine to stone that still held the day's heat. For one night, she told herself, just to think. The thinking lasted 3 days. On the first morning, Marta inventoried what she had. $8, the borrowed axe, the bent shovel, a skillet that could cook but not bake, an awl for leatherwork she did not know how to do, a tin cup, 1 blanket, enough flour for maybe 2 weeks of careful eating if she mixed it thin and baked it flat on heated stones. No horse, no mule, no wagon, no bed to return to. She walked the canyon in both directions, marking what she found. Deadfall pinyon and juniper scattered across the slopes above the rim, cottonwood and willow near the wash, but those burned fast and smoky. A seep spring a quarter-mile upstream that dribbled enough water to fill her cup twice a day if she was patient. No neighbors close enough to see. No trail traffic through the wash itself. By the third morning, she had stopped thinking about going somewhere else. There was nowhere else. The $8 might buy her passage to a settlement where she knew no one, owed nothing, and had no prospects beyond washing clothes, or worse. The canyon asked nothing of her except that she figure out how to stay alive. The question was whether she could. She was still working through that question when Ephraim Cutter rode down the switchback trail on a roan mare with a rope-burned neck. He was 58 years old, though he looked older. 11 winters between the Sevier and San Juan country had weathered his face into something that resembled the canyon walls themselves, red-brown, cracked, patient. He had buried a wife after a blizzard fever season. He had built 3 dugouts and 2 timber cabins with his own teams. He hauled freight before he ran stock, and he ran stock now because freight hauling had ruined his back. He found Marta gathering deadfall on the slope above the wash. "Whose girl are you?" he asked. "Nobody's," Marta said. "Not anymore." Cutter studied her for a long moment. Then he studied the overhang below, where her flour sack and blanket sat against the back wall like a claim that meant nothing. "Haugland's daughter," he said, was not a question. "Heard about that. Heard his new wife decided the household was crowded." Marta said nothing. "You planning to winter in that ledge?" "I am planning to winter somewhere. This is where I am." Cutter dismounted. He walked the overhang's mouth, kicked at the sand floor, looked up at the stone lip that curved out over the space like a frozen wave. Then he walked the slope behind it, counting deadfall, measuring distances with his eyes. When he came back, his face had not changed. It never did. But his voice carried something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "You have no cabin," he said. "No. No door, no frame, no roof poles, no chinking. No. 1 blanket. 1. How much wood have you gathered so far?" Marta pointed at her pile. Maybe an armload, maybe 2. Scavenged sticks and branches. Nothing thick enough to burn slow. Cutter looked at the pile the way a man might look at a child's drawing of a horse. Recognizable. Useless. "That is maybe a quarter cord if you are generous," he said, "and you are being generous. A quarter cord will last you 2 weeks in mild cold, less if you burn it wrong, a lot less if you burn it scared." "How much do I need?" "For a winter in canyon country? In a space like this, with no walls, no door, no draft control?" He shrugged. 6 cords, minimum. 7 if the winter runs long. 8 if you want to feel safe. 6 cords. Marta had helped stack wood at her father's place. She knew what a cord looked like. 128 cubic feet of fuel, stacked tight, bark out, ends matched. 6 cords was more wood than she could picture in one place. "You could cut that much before snow," Cutter said. "A strong man with a good axe and a mule to drag the logs could cut that much." "You are not a strong man. Your axe head is loose. You do not have a mule, and snow will come in 8 weeks, maybe 10. You are already behind." Marta looked at her quarter cord. It looked smaller now. "But that is not the real problem," Cutter said. "The real problem is this." He pointed at the overhang. "People last out here by getting under earth or behind timber, dugouts, cabins, sod walls, something between them and the wind. That ledge is not shelter. That ledge is a stone hood over open air. It blocks rain. Rain does not kill you. Cold kills you. Wind kills you. And wind does not stop at a rock lip. Wind finds every gap. Wind steals heat faster than you can make it. On a calm night at 10 degrees, you might survive with enough fire. On a windy night at 10 degrees, that same fire will not save you. The wind will take your heat before it reaches your body. He let that settle. Then he delivered the verdict. That ledge will kill you cleaner than the open. When the first hard norther comes, they will scrape you out frozen by morning. Marta should have argued. She should have defended herself, explained her thinking, pushed back against a man who knew more than she did about the thing that was about to kill her. Instead, she asked, "What would you do?" Cutter blinked. He had not expected the question. "I would not be here," he said. "I would find work in a settlement. I would marry someone with a roof. No, I would leave the canyon country to people who have the tools to survive it. And if you could not do any of those things, then I would dig. Earth holds heat. Earth blocks wind. A dugout costs nothing but labor, and labor is the only thing you seem to have." He looked at the hard-packed sand floor of the overhang. "But you cannot dig here. This is stone under sand. You would break your shovel in your back before you got deep enough to matter." He remounted his mare. "Go home, girl. Whatever your father's wife said, dying alone in a canyon is worse." Then he rode up the switchback and left her standing in the shadow of the stone lip that was going to kill her. Marta did not sleep that night. She sat against the back wall of the overhang and watched the stars wheel across the gap of sky above the canyon rim, while the temperature dropped after midnight. She wrapped herself in her mother's blanket and felt the cold creeping through anyway. Cutter was right. She knew he was right. The numbers did not work. The physics did not work. The time did not work. But she could not make herself leave. Sometime before dawn, she lit a small fire near the mouth of the overhang. Dry pinyon twigs caught fast and burned hot. She fed them carefully, one stick at a time, watching the flames. The smoke rose. It hit the stone lip above. And then it did something strange. Instead of escaping straight up into the open air, the smoke curled. It rolled backward along the underside of the overhang, pooling against the stone for just a moment before finding its way out at the edges. As if the rock itself was trying to hold on to the warmth, Marta watched the smoke curl and return and escape. She watched it for a long time. Her mother had cooked against stone in summer camps. Marta remembered watching her build fires in the lee of boulders, in the shelter of shallow rock faces, anywhere the wind could not steal the heat before it did its work. "Fire wastes itself in open wind," her mother had said once. "What matters in winter is not making a big fire once. What matters is keeping a small fire useful all night." Keeping a small fire useful. The overhang was not shelter. Cutter had made that clear. But maybe the overhang was half of shelter. Maybe the stone lip above was already doing the work a roof would do. Maybe the back wall was already doing the work a windbreak would do. Maybe she did not need to build a cabin. Maybe she needed to finish what the canyon had already started. The idea came slowly, piece by piece, while the fire burned down to coals, and the coals cooled to ash, and the first gray light crept across the rim. A lean-to inside the overhang. Not in front of it. Inside. Backside. Solid sandstone. Already there. Already blocking wind from one direction. Topside. The natural stone lip. Already there. Already catching smoke. Already holding warmth against its underside for just a moment before letting it go. Side closures. Brush. Salvaged poles. Whatever she could drag down from the slopes. She would have to build these, but they would be small. Short walls connecting the back of the lean-to to the overhang's edges. Front side, the open mouth that faced the wash and let the wind in, that was the problem. And that was where Cutter said she would die. You cannot close a 14-foot opening with brush and poles, not tight enough to stop wind, not strong enough to survive the first real storm. But what if the wall did not have to be permanent? What if the wall was made of firewood? Marta sat very still as the idea took shape. A wall of stacked wood across the mouth of the overhang, 2 feet thick, maybe more. Dry pinyon and juniper logs laid bark out, packed tight, with a narrow gap just wide enough to squeeze through. The wood wall would do 3 things at once. It would block wind. It would store fuel within arm's reach. And every log she burned would come from the barrier itself, replaced from the outside as she cut more. She would not need 6 cords for the winter. She would need 3 cords in the wall at any time, now plus whatever she could cut ahead of consumption. The wall was the fuel supply. The fuel supply was the wall. They were the same thing. Fire at the mouth, not at the back. Smoke would rise against the stone lip, curl, and escape through the gap between the top of the wood wall and the overhang's edge. Heat would radiate inward from the fire. The stone above would absorb some of that heat during the night and release it slowly. The sleeper would lie behind the fire in the warmest pocket with stone at her back and fuel at her front. It could work. It could also kill her. If smoke backed up wrong, she would choke. If snow sealed the mouth, she would suffocate. If a spark caught the wall, she would burn. If she exhausted wood faster than she could replace it, she would freeze with her shelter disappearing stick by stick around her. Marta counted the ways she could die. Then she counted the alternatives. Marriage to whoever would take her. Labor in a household that did not want her. Passage to a settlement where she knew no one. Walking until her feet gave out and the cold found her anyway. The overhang could kill her, but everything else would definitely kill her. The overhang was the only option that came with doubt instead of certainty. She picked up the borrowed axe and walked toward the slope where the deadfall waited. Ada Merriweather found her 3 days later. Ada was 32, a ranch wife with a homestead 5 miles upstream from the canyon's mouth. She had buried 2 children before they could walk and raised 3 more who could. Her hands were thick with calluses from work that never stopped. Her eyes missed nothing. She had heard about the Hogland girl from riders passing through. A girl alone in the wash, people said, building something under a rock ledge, either crazy or dead within the month. Ada rode down to see for herself. What she found was not what she expected. Marta had cut the first forked uprights for the lean-to frame. She had lashed a ridgepole under the deepest part of the overhang. She had begun braiding willow for the side panels. The work was rough, uneven, clearly the effort of someone who had never built anything larger than a bread fire. But the work was also methodical. Marta had laid out her design in the sand with sticks before she started. She had tested the prevailing wind by dropping ash and watching where it drifted. She had marked the slope of the floor and calculated where water would pool if rain blew in. "You are the Hogland girl," Ada said from her horse. "I am Marta. Ada Merriweather. I live upstream." Marta nodded, but did not stop braiding. "People are saying you mean to winter under this ledge." "People are saying a lot of things." Ada dismounted and walked the space the way Cutter had. She looked at the lean-to frame, the ridgepole, the side panels in progress. Then she looked at the scattered deadfall Marta had dragged down from the slope. Maybe half a cord now, rough pieces waiting to be stacked. "You are planning a wood wall," Ada said. It was not a question. Across the mouth, Marta looked up. "How did you know?" "Because I am not stupid, and neither are you." Ada crouched near the stack. "A wall you burn is no wall. A wall I do not burn is just timber sitting in the cold. And if the wood dries too fast beside the fire, one spark catches the bark, and you cook in your sleep. I will face the bark out. I will keep the fire low and forward. I will use flat stones as a shield between the flames and the wall." Ada raised an eyebrow. "You have thought about this?" I have thought about nothing else for 3 days. Ada was quiet for a long moment. She touched the braided willow, tested the tension of the lashing on the ridgepole, ran her palm along the smooth stone of the back wall. What about snow? She asked finally. What about it? A wall across the opening means snow piles against it, packs it tight. Drifts seal the gaps. If you cannot clear it fast enough, you choke before morning. Marta hesitated. All this was the question she had not answered yet. The canyon faced roughly southeast. Winter storms came from the northwest. That meant the overhang's mouth would catch snow at an angle, not head-on. But a bad enough storm would drift snow everywhere, angles be damned. I will dig out, she said, every morning, every night if I have to. In a blizzard, in wind that knocks you off your feet, in cold that freezes your shovel to the ground while you stop to catch your breath? Marta did not answer. She did not have an answer. Ada stood. She looked at the girl, at the lean-to, at the scattered wood, at the stone overhead that might shelter her or might bury her. You're going to try this anyway, Ada said. Yes. Even though it might kill you. Everything might kill me. This is the only thing that might let me live. Ada mounted her horse. She sat looking down at Marta for a long moment, her face unreadable. My husband says you are a fool, she said. My neighbors say you are proud and stubborn and asking for exactly what you are about to get. Cutter said he already told you to leave and you did not listen. Marta waited. I am not going to tell you to leave, Ada said. I am not going to tell you that you are wrong. I am going to tell you that if you die under this ledge, nobody will come looking for you until spring, and by then, what is left of you will not be something anyone wants to find. She turned her horse toward the switchback. If you are still alive in 2 weeks, she called back, I might bring you salt. You will need salt. Then she was gone, and Marta was alone again with a lean-to that was half built, and a wood wall that did not exist, and a winter that was coming whether she was ready or not. Rufus Bell came the following week. He was 41 years old, a wood seller who ran a side business in hauling freight. He had fat fingers and a wide face, and a smile that showed too many teeth. He had been trying to convince Marta's father to bind the girl out to his household for months, arguing that she could work off the family's debt through labor in his home. That arrangement would have given Bell a servant he did not have to pay. It would have given him other things too. Marta had seen the way he looked at her when he visited the homestead. She had made sure never to be alone with him. Now she was very alone, and he had found her. He rode down the switchback trail at midday, when the sun was high and the shadows were short. Marta was stacking wood near the overhang's mouth, building the first course of the wall that would save her life or end it. Bell dismounted slowly. He walked toward her with his hands in his pockets, smiling that too wide smile. Building your own coffin, one stick at a time? He asked. Marta did not answer. She set another log in place, bark out, ends matched. Your father's worried about you, Bell said. Sent me to check. My father told me not to come back. He told you not to come back empty-handed. That is different. Bell walked closer. His shadow fell across the stack. A girl alone in a canyon, winter coming, no prospects, no protection. That is not a situation. That is a tragedy waiting to happen. I am building a shelter. You are stacking sticks under a rock. Bell kicked at the lowest course of the wall. 2 logs shifted. One rolled free and tumbled down the slope toward the wash. See? A child could knock this down. A storm will scatter it like kindling. Marta retrieved the fallen log. She set it back in place. She did not look at Bell. I came to offer you a way out, Bell said. Your father owes me $17 from last winter's wood supply. Lumber I cut, hauled, and stacked for a family that could not afford to pay. That debt sits on his ledger. It will sit there until somebody settles it. I do not have $17. No, but you have two hands and a strong back, and winter coming on. My wife needs help with the household. My boys need watching while I haul freight. You could work that debt off in a season, maybe less. Then you would be free and clear, and your father would owe me nothing. Marta stacked another log. And what would I owe you? The smile flickered. Gratitude, Belle said. That is all? Just gratitude. The word hung in the air between them. Marta had heard men use that word before. She knew what it meant when a man like Belle said it to a girl like her. No, she said. No? No, I will not come to your household. I will not work for you. I will not owe you anything. Belle's smile vanished. His face went flat and hard, like a door closing. You are making a mistake, he said. A girl alone is a target, for weather, for animals, for men who are not as patient as I am. You think this canyon will protect you? This canyon is a grave with a view, and when it buries you, nobody will mourn. He mounted his horse. I will give you until first snow to change your mind, he said. After that, the offer closes, and then we will see how proud you feel when the cold starts biting. He rode up the switchback trail. Marta watched him go. Then she picked up her axe and walked toward the slope where the deadfall waited. She had more wood to cut. The work consumed her. Every day before dawn, Marta climbed the slope above the canyon rim and searched for deadfall. Pinyon pines that had died standing and dried in place. Juniper tangles that had fallen in storms years ago and lay waiting for someone who needed them. She cut what she could carry and dragged it down to the wash in bundles lashed with braided willow. The axe head loosened on the third day. She wedged it tighter with scraps of leather cut from her flour sack. It loosened again on the fifth day. She learned to check the binding every morning and every evening, tapping the head against stone until it seated firm. Her hands blistered. The blisters broke. The broken skin hardened into calluses that cracked and bled. She wrapped her palms with strips torn from her blanket's hem and kept cutting. The lean-to frame went up in the first week. 4 forked uprights, 1 ridgepole, a slope of brush and salvaged canvas tilted away from the overhang's mouth. It was crude. The joints did not quite match. Wind would find the gaps, but it was shelter within shelter, a second skin beneath the stone. The side panels took 3 more days. Braided willow woven through upright stakes, chinked with mud and dried grass. The mud came from a bank near the seep spring. Marta carried it in her skillet, load after load, and packed it into the gaps with her bare hands. The grass came from a meadow half a mile upstream, where autumn had turned the stalks golden and dry. By the end of the second week, the lean-to was skinned and braced. The sleeping platform rose 6 inches off the stone floor on a frame of poles and brush. She lined it with juniper boughs and her single blanket, and when she lay down at night, she no longer felt the cold creeping up from beneath. But the wood wall was barely started. Marta had stacked perhaps 1/8 of a cord across the overhang's mouth. The logs stood waist-high at the center and knee-high at the edges. A strong wind would push through the gaps like a hand pushing through curtains. She needed 3/4 of a cord by the first heavy snow. She had 8 weeks, maybe 10. The math said she could do it. The math said nothing about exhaustion or injury or weather turning early or the 100 small catastrophes that could end her before winter officially began. The first hard frost came in late September. Marta woke to ice crystals on the inside of her lean-to. Her water skin had frozen overnight. The wood wall's gaps let cold pour through like water through a sieve. She built her morning fire with shaking hands. The heat touched her face, but the cold still gripped her back. When she breathed, she could see her breath hanging in the air even inside the shelter. She had a month left, maybe 6 weeks. Not enough time, not enough wood, not enough certainty that any of this would work. See, but quitting meant Belle's offer. Quitting meant her stepmother's triumph. Quitting meant admitting that everyone who said she would fail had been right all along. Marta picked up her axe. She checked the binding. She climbed the slope toward the deadfall stands. If she was going to die under this ledge, she would die working. Tom Percival found her on a morning when the axe head finally split the haft. She was sitting on a boulder above the wash, staring at the broken tool in her hands. The metal head lay in the dirt at her feet. The wooden handle had cracked lengthwise, a fracture that started at the eye and ran down through the grain until the whole thing came apart. $8 would not buy a new axe. $8 was already down to $6 and change after flour and salt and a length of rope she needed for hauling. One new axe cost $3 at the trading post 15 miles upstream. That would leave her with barely enough to survive on if something else broke. She was calculating how long she could last without cutting more wood when the old man appeared on the trail above. He walked with a pronounced limp, favoring his left leg in a way that suggested old injury rather than age. His clothes were patched and repatched, layers of canvas and wool held together by stitching that had been redone so many times the original seams had disappeared. He carried a walking stick cut from juniper, polished smooth by years of use. "That axe is finished," he said. His accent was English, worn soft by decades in the American territories. The haft was green when they fitted it, bound to split once the wood dried out. Marta looked up. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know your situation. Word travels in canyon country." He limped closer and studied the broken axe head. "Percival, Tom Percival. I have a place upriver, if you can call a half-dug hole a place." "You came to tell me my axe is broken?" "I came to see if the stories were true." He looked past her toward the overhang. From this angle, the lean-to frame was visible, and the half-built wood wall, and the scattered supplies that represented everything Marta owned in the world. "They said you were building something under a rock ledge. They said you were either clever or crazy. Which do you think?" Tom did not answer immediately. He walked down the slope toward the wash, moving carefully on his bad leg, and crossed the dry stream bed to the overhang's mouth. Marta followed. He spent a long time looking. He touched the lean-to poles. He tested the lashing, examined the angle of the brush roof relative to the stone lip above. He walked the length of the wood wall and counted the courses. He crouched near the fire pit and studied the arrangement of flat stones she had placed to shield the flames. "You marked the wind," he said finally. "What?" "The ash." He pointed at faint gray smears on the sandstone floor near the overhang's edges. "You burned small fires in different spots and watched where the ash drifted. That is how you knew where to place your sleeping platform." Marta nodded slowly. "The wind comes from the northwest most nights, but it shifts before storms. I needed to know where the dead air pockets were." "And the smoke? You tested that too?" "I watched where it went when I lit my first fire. The lip catches it, holds it for a moment. Then it escapes at the edges." Tom straightened up. His knees cracked. His face was still unreadable, but something in his posture had changed. "I spent 20 years building culverts and retaining walls in rough country," he said. "Stage roads through mountain passes, bridges over flood channels. I learned to read stone the way some men read books. Most people look at a cliff face and see rock. I look at a cliff face and see angles, weight distribution, shear planes, places where the stone wants to move and places where it wants to stay. He tapped his walking stick against the overhang's back wall. This ledge wants to stay. The angle is good. The stone above is solid. No visible fracture lines, no water staining that would suggest freeze-thaw damage. You picked better than you knew. Does that mean it will work? It means you did not pick a death trap. Tom limped toward the wood wall. But your wall is wrong. He stayed 3 hours that first day. The pitch was wrong, he explained. Not the lean-to pitch, that was acceptable, but the angle of the wood wall itself. Marta had stacked the logs flat, one course atop another, the way she had seen wood stacked at her father's homestead. That was fine for a storage pile. It was not fine for a wind barrier. Flat stacking leaves gaps, Tom said. See here? And here? Wind finds those gaps. Wind is patient. Wind has nothing but time. He showed her how to angle the logs slightly, tilting each course so the upper edge overlapped the lower edge's gaps. The technique added no new materials, cost only attention. But when he finished restacking a section of the wall, the barrier went from porous to nearly solid. Snow will pack against this, he said. That is not a problem. Snow is insulation. What you cannot have is wind finding a path through. Wind steals heat before it reaches your body. A drafty wall is no wall at all. He showed her how to position flat stones in front of the fire pit, angling them to deflect heat inward without catching direct flame. He showed her how to dig a shallow cold air trench near the overhang's mouth, so the densest cold air would pool in the trench instead of spreading across the floor where she slept. Cold air sinks, he said. Give it somewhere to sink to, and it will leave you alone. He showed her how to sort her wood supply into 3 categories: tonight wood, 3-day wood, and storm reserve wood. Tonight wood was the driest, the smallest, the fastest burning. 3-day wood was larger pieces that would need time near the fire to drive off moisture before they burned clean. Storm reserve wood was the densest, slowest burning fuel, kept farthest from the flames, and touched only when everything else was gone. You will want to burn your best wood first, Tom said. When you are cold and scared, you will reach for whatever burns hottest and fastest. That is how people freeze to death in February, with a stack of green logs they cannot light. Marta listened. She watched. She rebuilt the section of wall he had restacked, matching his technique as closely as she could. When she finished, Tom examined her work without comment. Then he took his walking stick and knocked down one of the support poles for the lean-to's side panel. Rebuild it, he said. What? Why? Because you lashed the joint wrong. The binding will slip under load. Snow will pile on this panel during a storm, and when it slips, your shelter fails. He pointed at the collapsed section. Rebuild it. I will watch. Marta rebuilt it. It took her an hour to get the lashing right. Tom made her redo it twice before he was satisfied. By the time he left, the sun was low and the canyon was filling with shadow. I will come back in 3 days, he said. Have the wall 2 courses higher by then. Why are you helping me? Tom paused on the trail. His bad leg was clearly bothering him. The day's walking had cost him something. Because you marked the wind before you cut poles, he said. Most people guess. You looked. That tells me you have a chance. He limped up the switchback and disappeared over the rim. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Cut wood in the morning while the air was cool and the body had energy to spare. Drag it down to the wash in bundles. Stack it before midday when the sun was high enough to warm the canyon floor. Work on the lean-to in the afternoon when cutting was too exhausting and detailed work kept the mind occupied. Eat sparingly, sleep early, wake before dawn, and begin again. Tom came every third day. He never stayed more than a few hours. He never did the work himself. But he watched everything Marta did, and when she made mistakes, he made her correct them until the correction became habit. The wood wall rose. Knee height became waist height became chest height. The gaps closed. The barrier thickened. By the first week of October, Marta had nearly half a cord stacked across the overhang's mouth, with more drying on a rack she had built from salvaged poles. But the weather was changing too. The first snow came on October 9th. Just a dusting, barely enough to whiten the canyon rim. But it reminded Marta of what was coming. She worked faster. Her hands cracked and bled. Her shoulders ached from swinging the axe. The borrowed axe was gone, replaced by a hatchet Tom had brought her, an old tool, nicked and worn, but functional. It cost her nothing. Tom said a man he knew had died with no heirs, and the tools had needed a home. Marta did not ask if that was true. Ephraim Cutter appeared again on a cold morning in mid-October. He rode down the switchback trail the same way he had before, slow and watchful, his roan mare picking her way through loose stone. This time he did not dismount. He sat in the saddle and studied the overhang from a distance. The lean-to was finished now. The wood wall was chest-high across most of the mouth. The entry gap was narrow, just wide enough to squeeze through sideways. The fire pit was ringed with flat stones. The sleeping platform was raised and lined with juniper boughs. "Still here," Cutter said. "Still here. I heard you have help. An old English quarryman. Tom Percival. He has been teaching me." Cutter was quiet for a moment. "Percival is half crippled and winter-touched. Whatever he's teaching you comes from a man who cannot do the work himself anymore. Take that for what it is worth." "It is worth more than what you taught me." Cutter's face did not change. "What I taught you was the truth. The truth does not care if you like it." He walked his mare closer to the overhang's mouth. He studied the wood wall, the angle of the logs, the overlapping courses. "Clever," he admitted. "You close the mouth with fuel you intend to burn. Wall gets thinner, you cut more. That part makes sense." He pointed at the gap between the top of the wall and the stone lip above. "But that space stays open. For smoke. For wind. A storm blows straight into that gap. You're breathing ice crystals all night." Marta pointed at the rack of drying wood inside the lean-to. "When a storm comes, I stack green logs across the top of the wall. They close the gap. Smoke escapes through the gaps between them. When the storm passes, I remove them and burn the dry wood below." Cutter considered this. "And if the storm lasts 5 days? 6? If you run out of dry wood and have to burn the wet barrier you stacked on top?" "Then I burn it and hope I stacked enough before the storm." "Hoping is not surviving." "No, but preparing for every hope is the best I can do." Cutter was quiet for a long time. His mare shifted beneath him. Wind gusted through the canyon, cold enough that Marta could feel it pressing against the wood wall like a hand testing a door. "Dry is not warm," Cutter said finally. "That is still true. Your shelter is drier than I expected. It is better sealed than I expected. But dry and sealed does not mean you will survive a killing cold." He turned his mare toward the trail. "January will test you," he said, "not December. December is just the warning. January is when people die." Then he rode up the switchback and left Marta standing in the shadow of a shelter that might or might not save her life. November brought storms, 3 of them in the first 2 weeks, each one worse than the last. The first was rain mixed with sleet. the kind of weather that made cutting wood impossible and turned the wash into a muddy stream. The second was pure snow, heavy and wet, piling against the wood wall until Marta had to dig out the entry gap twice in a single night. The third was wind without precipitation, a dry norther that screamed through the canyon for 36 hours and made the fire nearly impossible to keep lit. Marta survived all three. The wood wall held. The lean-to stayed dry. The fire burned when she fed it carefully, shielding the flames with flat stones, nursing each stick into coals before adding more. She learned to read the weather by watching the way smoke behaved, rising straight on calm nights, flattening and curling when wind was coming. But each storm cost her fuel. By the end of November, she had burned through nearly half her reserve. The wood wall was thinner now, barely a foot thick at the center. She needed to cut more. The weather barely gave her time. Tom stopped coming in early December. The first week, Marta assumed he was simply waiting for better conditions. The trails were icy. His leg was bad. A man his age could not risk a fall in freezing weather. The second week, she climbed to his half-dug shelter upriver and found it empty. Cold ashes in the fire pit. No tracks in the snow. A note scratched into a flat piece of bark. Gone to the settlement. Keep back when I can. She did not know what that meant. She did not know if he was sick or in trouble or simply tired of teaching a girl who might die anyway. She went back to cutting wood. The wall grew thin. The weather grew cold. December became a blur of labor and exhaustion and nights spent feeding a fire that never seemed to produce enough heat. Ada Merriweather came on Christmas Day. She did not announce herself. She simply appeared at the Overhang's mouth, carrying a sack and leading a mule loaded with bundles. "Still alive," Ada said. "Still alive." Ada set the sack on the ground. Inside was salt, a clay pot sealed with wax, a needle packet, and a length of heavy canvas. "The canvas is from my husband's old freight cover," Ada said. "It is too torn for hauling, but it will close a gap." Marta looked at the supplies. They represented more than she could afford, more than she had any right to expect. "Why?" "Because I said I might bring you salt if you survive 2 weeks. It has been 3 months. Ada looked at the lean-to, the thinning wood wall, the fire pit with its ring of flat stones. "You did not just survive, you built something that works." "It works so far. Cutter says January will test it." "Cutter says a lot of things. He is usually right, which is why people hate him." Ada pointed at the wood wall. "You need more fuel." "I know. Bell has been telling people he owns the deadfall stands north of the canyon mouth. He says anyone who cuts there is stealing from him." Marta's stomach tightened. "He does not own those stands." "He owns enough men who will say he does. If you cut there and he catches you, he will call it theft." "Then you are not just a stubborn girl. You are a thief. That changes how people see you." "What am I supposed to do? Let him starve me out?" Ada was quiet for a moment. "There are stands to the south, harder to reach, worse wood, but Bell has no claim on them. The south stands are half a day's walk each way. I would spend all my cutting time walking." "Yes." Ada looked at her steadily. "That is the choice. Cut north and risk Bell, cut south and risk time, or find another way." "What other way?" Ada untied one of the bundles on her mule. Inside were 3 dozen straight pinion poles, cut and trimmed and dried. "I brought these for my husband's lambing shed," she said. "He says we do not need them until spring. If they happen to end up stacked against your wall instead, nobody needs to know where they came from." Marta stared at the poles. 3 dozen. Enough to raise the wall 2 courses across the full width of the mouth. I cannot pay for these. You can teach me what you learned from Percival, the angled stacking, the fire positioning, the cold air trench. Ada's face was hard, but her voice had softened. My husband thinks I'm soft for helping you. Maybe I am. But I've buried 2 children who might have lived if we had better shelter on bad nights. If what you have built works, I want to know how. Marta nodded slowly. When the crisis passes, when I know for certain it works, I will teach you everything. That is good enough. Ada unloaded the poles and left before noon. Marta stacked them against the wall and watched the sky darken toward another storm. As January came in cold and stayed colder, the 9th dawned gray and still, the kind of morning that felt like the world holding its breath. Marta had been awake since before light, feeding her fire, watching the smoke curl against the stone lip and escape through the gap at the top of the wall. The wall was thick again, nearly 2 feet at the center. She had burned less fuel than expected in December. She had cut more than expected in the south stands. The math was finally working. Then the temperature began to drop. It happened so fast that Marta felt it before she saw it. The fire seemed to shrink. The stones around the pit cooled. Her breath, which had been faintly visible all morning, suddenly became a thick white plume that hung in the air. She checked her water skin. The water inside was slushy. By midday, it would be solid. She fed the fire larger pieces. The flames rose, crackled, threw heat that touched her face but could not warm her back. The cold was coming from everywhere at once. By noon, the sky had turned the color of iron. Wind began to rise from the northwest, first in gusts, and then in steady pressure that made the overhang's mouth whistle. Snow started falling, not the heavy wet flakes of November storms, but tiny hard crystals that stung the skin and accumulated faster than seemed possible. Marta closed the entry gap with her canvas and brush plug. She stacked green logs across the top of the wall the way she had planned. She checked her fuel supply, enough for 3 days of hard burning, maybe 4 if she was careful. The temperature kept dropping. By late afternoon, the wind was screaming through the canyon. Snow drove sideways, piling against the wood wall in drifts that rose an inch every few minutes. Marta could hear the logs creaking as the weight pressed against them. She fed the fire. She watched the smoke. She waited. The boy appeared at dusk. He came down the trail half frozen, clinging to a mule that was already stumbling. Marta heard the animal's hooves scraping against stone before she saw them, a shape moving through white fury, getting closer. She pulled back the canvas plug and peered through the entry gap. Ada's younger son, 12 years old. Ice crusted on his eyebrows and nostrils. His hands were blue. "Get inside," Marta said. "Now." He fell off the mule and crawled through the gap. Marta pulled him toward the fire and wrapped her blanket around his shoulders. His teeth chattered so hard she could hear them over the wind. Tom, he managed. Tom Percival. He fell, near the ford. Leg went out. He cannot walk. Marta's stomach dropped. "Where?" "Upstream. Half-mile, maybe less. My mother sent me." The boy's eyes were wide, terrified. "She said Belle's wife is having her baby early. Their cabin fire is failing. Wet wood. No heat. My mother went to help." "And Tom?" "Nobody went for Tom. Nobody knew he was out there until he did not come back." Marta looked at the fire, at the wood wall, at the storm howling beyond the canvas plug. Tom was upstream, half a mile, in a blizzard that would kill an able man in an hour. His leg was bad on good days. With a fall, with the cold, he would be dead by morning. But if she left the shelter, she might die too. She might leave this boy alone in a place he did not know how to maintain. Was she might freeze in the open trying to reach a man who was already gone. How long ago did he fall? Before the storm got bad. Maybe 3 hours. 3 hours. In this cold, with that wind, with no shelter. Marta fed the fire one more time. She stacked extra fuel within arm's reach of the sleeping platform. She looked at the boy. "Keep the fire burning," she said. "Small pieces. Steady. Do not let it go out. Do not open the entry gap for any reason. Do you understand?" "Where are you going?" "To find Tom." She pulled on every piece of clothing she had. She wrapped her face with strips of sacking. She took the hatchet. Then she pushed through the canvas plug and into the storm. The world outside was white chaos. Wind hit her like a wall. Snow drove into her face despite the wrapping, finding every gap, every exposed inch of skin. She could see maybe 10 feet ahead. The trail upstream was buried under drifts that reached her knees. She walked. The cold was unlike anything she had ever felt. It was not just discomfort. It was active malice, a force that pressed against her body and tried to steal everything warm. Her fingers went numb inside the first 100 yards. Her feet followed shortly after. She kept walking. The ford was half a mile upstream. She knew the landmarks, a twisted cottonwood, a boulder shaped like a sleeping dog, a point where the wash narrowed between two sandstone walls. The storm had erased all of them. She navigated by feel, by memory, by the angle of the canyon walls that she could sometimes glimpse through the blowing snow. Tom. She found him wedged against the sleeping dog boulder, though his body curled into a shape that might have been protective or might have been dying. His face was white. Ice had formed on his beard, on his eyebrows, on the hand that still gripped his walking stick. "Tom." No response. Marta dropped to her knees beside him. She pulled off a glove and pressed her bare fingers against his throat. For one terrible moment she felt nothing. Then, a pulse. Faint, slow, but present. "Tom. Tom, wake up." His eyes opened a crack. He looked at her without recognition. His lips moved, but no sound came out. She could not carry him. She could not even lift him. He was twice her weight, and her strength was already failing in the cold. But she could drag him. She looped her rope under his arms and around her waist. She leaned into the wind and pulled. His body moved 6 inches. She pulled again. Or another 6 inches. Half a mile. At 6 inches, a pull. Marta stopped calculating. Calculations would kill her. She pulled. She did not remember most of the journey back. Later, she would recall fragments. The moment her knee buckled and she fell face first into a drift. The sound of Tom's body scraping over frozen stones. The way the cold stopped hurting somewhere around the halfway point, which she knew was dangerous but could not bring herself to care about. What she remembered clearly was the light. Firelight, visible through the blowing snow. A warm glow coming from the entry gap that the boy had opened despite her instructions. He was standing in the gap, waving a burning branch, screaming her name over the wind. She dragged Tom the last 100 feet. The boy helped pull him through the entry gap, and they rolled him toward the fire and piled everything warm they had on top of him. Tom's eyes opened again. This time, they focused. "Fool girl," he whispered. His voice was a rasp. "Should have let me die." "You taught me how to stack wood," Marta said. "I was not going to let that go to waste." The crisis deepened through the night. Ada arrived an hour after Marta returned, leading Belle's youngest child wrapped in grain sacking. The boy was 3 years old. He had stopped shivering, which was worse than shivering. "Belle's cabin is failing," Ada said. Her face was gray with exhaustion. The roof seam lifted in the wind. Their wood is too wet to burn. His wife is in labor. The midwife cannot reach them. Where is Bell? Searching for Tom. He did not know you found him. The shelter had been built for one person. Now it held 5. Marta, Ada, the 2 boys, and Tom. The air grew thick with breath. The fire had to burn hotter to warm more bodies, which meant fuel disappeared faster. Marta fed the fire larger pieces. The temperature inside the shelter rose, but so did the humidity. Smoke began to back up against the stone lip instead of escaping. She remembered Tom's lesson about draft control. She climbed to the top of the wood wall and pulled one log free, creating a higher vent slit. Cold air rushed in. The smoke found the gap and escaped. The 3-year-old began to warm. His shivering returned, which meant his body was fighting again. Keep him close to the fire, Marta told Ada. Not on the fire, close. His body needs to remember how to make heat. Hours passed. Tom drifted in and out of consciousness. His leg was badly twisted, maybe broken. Marta did not know how to set bones. She knew only how to keep him warm and watch his breathing. The storm continued to scream outside. Bell arrived near midnight. He came through the entry gap covered in snow and ice, his face red and raw from wind exposure. He looked at the shelter, at his youngest son wrapped in blankets near the fire, at Ada tending Tom, at Marta feeding fuel to the flames that were keeping everyone alive, and his expression went through something complicated. My wife, he said. The baby. They are at your cabin? I could not move them. The wind. Then we bring heat to them. Marta stood up. Ada, can you keep the fire here? What are you planning? Bell's cabin is failing, but mine is not. If we can warm his family enough to survive the night, we move them here tomorrow. How do you warm them in a failing cabin? Marta pointed at the rack of drying wood inside the lean-to. We take coals, wrapped in wet sacking, carried in a bucket, insulated with ash. We take dry fuel that will catch from coals. We rebuild their fire. In this storm? The storm is already weakening. Can you not feel it? The wind has dropped by half in the last hour. Bell stared at her. You would help me. I would help your wife. I would help your child. You happen to be attached. Bell's jaw tightened. For a moment, Marta thought he might argue, might refuse help from a girl he had tried to bind into servitude. Then he nodded. They made the trip twice. The first time, Marta and Bell carried hot coals and dry fuel through the weakening storm to Bell's cabin. They found his wife unconscious from cold, the newborn baby wrapped against her chest but barely breathing. The fire had gone out hours ago. Ice had formed on the inside of the walls. They rebuilt the fire. They warmed stones and placed them around the woman and child. They fed the flames until the cabin's interior stopped being a death trap. The second trip, at dawn, moved Bell's wife and both children to Marta's Overhang shelter. By then the storm had passed. The sky was clear and pale, the kind of blue that only appeared after killing cold. Snow lay 3 feet deep across the canyon floor. The wood wall was buried almost to the top in drifts, but the shelter was warm. The fire was burning. 7 people crowded into a space built for one, and every single one of them was alive. Bell's wife opened her eyes and looked around. She saw the stone overhead, the wood wall, the lean-to structure that Marta had built with her own hands. Where are we? She whispered. Somewhere warm, Marta said. Rest. Ephraim Cutter arrived the next morning. He rode down the switchback trail expecting bodies. That was what he told Marta later, that he had come to count the dead, to help bury whoever the storm had taken, to do the grim work that frontier communities always did after killing weather. Instead, he found boot prints in the snow around the overhang's mouth, smoke rising from a well-controlled fire, the sound of a child laughing inside. He dismounted and walked to the entry gap. Inside, Marta feeding the fire. Tom propped against the back wall, legs splinted, face pale, but alert. Ada nursing Belle's infant while Belle's wife slept. Belle himself sitting near the flames, and saying nothing, staring at the floor. Cutter looked at the shelter, at the wood wall that had held against the storm, at the stone lip that had trapped heat and shed snow, at the narrow space that had protected 7 lives through a night that killed stock in open pastures 5 miles away. "I said the ledge would bury you," Cutter said. Marta looked up at him. Her face was gaunt from exhaustion. Her hands were cracked and bleeding. She had not slept in 2 days. "You were wrong," she said. Cutter nodded slowly. "The wind never got a clean bite at you. I did not think that was possible." He looked at Tom. "Percival, I see you are still breathing." "Barely," Tom said. His voice was weak but clear. "The girl dragged me half a mile through that storm. If she had not come, I would be frozen in the wash." Cutter looked at Marta again. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a recognition that had not been there before. "Dry is not warm," he said. "I still believe that. But you found a way to be both. I did not think it could be done." He turned and walked back toward his horse. "Tell people," Marta called after him, "when they ask what happened here, tell them the truth." Cutter paused. "The truth is, you built something that should not have worked. The truth is, it worked anyway." He mounted his mare and rode up the switchback trail. The storm of January 9th killed 11 people in the canyon country that winter. 3 were children. 2 were experienced ranchers who had survived worse weather in worse conditions but made a single mistake, leaving shelter to check on stock and paid for it with their lives. Marta's shelter lost no one. By the time the snow melted enough for travel, word had spread. A girl alone in a wash, a rock overhang that should have been a death trap, 7 people alive when they should have been dead. People began asking questions. The crisis aftermath lasted 3 days. Belle's wife recovered slowly. The infant, a girl born in a failing cabin during a killing storm, survived with all her fingers and toes, which was more than anyone had expected. Tom's leg was not broken, only badly twisted, but he could not walk without support for weeks. Then the questions began. The first visitor arrived on January 14th. His name was Orrin Haslip, a sheep man with a spread 12 miles east of the canyon. He had lost 43 animals in the storm. His lambing shed had collapsed under snow weight. His wife had frostbite on 3 fingers that might still turn black and fall off. He rode down the switchback trail at mid-morning and stood at the mouth of the overhang, studying the wood wall the way a man might study a horse he was considering buying. "Cutter told me about this," Haslip said. "Said a girl built a shelter under a rock that kept 7 people alive through the worst night in 11 winters." "Cutter told you true," Marta said. "Show me how it works." Marta showed him. She walked him through the design piece by piece. The stone lip that caught rising heat and reflected some of it back down. The wood wall that blocked wind while storing fuel within arm's reach. The angled stacking that eliminated gaps. The cold air trench that gave dense air somewhere to pool. The fire placement forward, near the mouth, so smoke could escape while heat radiated inward. Haslip listened without interrupting. When she finished, he crouched near the fire pit and examined the flat stones she had positioned as heat deflectors. "My lambing shed had a stove," he said. Cast iron, good draft. It still was not enough. A stove heats the air around it. The air moves. The heat escapes through every crack in the walls. Marta pointed at the stone overhead. This traps heat because the heat has nowhere to go. It rises, hits rock, spreads. The walls are close. The volume is small. You are not trying to warm a room. You are trying to warm a pocket. And the wood wall? You just burn it piece by piece? I burn it and replace it. The wall is never finished. It is always becoming fuel and always being rebuilt. Haslip stood up. His face was still unreadable, but something in his posture had shifted. Could this work for lambing? A shelter like this built against a cliff face with a wood wall to keep wind off the ewes? It could work for anything that needs warmth in a small space. Will you teach my wife? She has steadier hands than I do. She could build better than me. Marta thought of Ada's request on Christmas Day. She thought of her own promise. When the crisis passes, I will teach you everything. Bring her, Marta said. I will show her what I know. Ada Merriweather came 2 days later. She brought her husband, a thick-shouldered man named Colum, who had dismissed Marta's project as foolishness from the beginning. He walked the shelter without speaking, testing joints, measuring angles with his eyes, running his palm along the wood wall to feel how tightly the logs fit together. When he finished, he turned to his wife. She's not wrong, he said. The words seemed to cost him something. The construction is rough in places, but the principles are sound. I told you, Ada said. You told me she was clever. You did not tell me she was right. Colum looked at Marta. My wife said you would teach her how to build this, in exchange for nothing. In exchange for the poles and canvas she brought me before Christmas, and the salt, and the needle packet. That was charity. That was trade. She gave me what I needed to survive. I give her what she needs to protect her family. The value is equal. Colum was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Teach her, he said. Teach me too, if you have patience for a man who did not believe you. Marta taught them both. She showed them how to read prevailing wind by watching ash drift. She showed them how to choose a stable overhang instead of a dangerous flake. Look for solid stone above, no visible fracture lines, no water staining that would suggest freeze-thaw damage. She showed them how to sort wood by burn speed, how to angle logs for tight stacking, how to position a fire for maximum heat retention with minimum smoke. Ada learned faster than Colum. Her hands remembered details that his eyes missed. By the end of the second day, she could rebuild a section of wood wall faster than Marta could. You have a gift for this, Marta said. I have buried 2 children who might have lived if we had better shelter, Ada said. That is not a gift. That is a debt I mean to repay. The visitors continued. Haslip's wife came and learned. She went home and built a lambing shelter against a sandstone outcrop on their property. When the next cold snap hit in late January, she saved 9 newborn lambs that would have frozen in the old shed. A family named Eklund traveled 2 days from upstream to see the Overhang shelter. They had lost a grandfather to the January storm. The old man had been caught between homesteads when the weather turned, and by the time they found him, he was frozen, sitting upright against a boulder, still holding the walking stick that had not been enough to save him. We need shelters along the trail, the eldest Eklund son said. Places people can reach if weather catches them in the open. That is a different problem, Marta said. This shelter works because I live here. I maintain it. I keep the fire burning. An empty shelter along a trail would fill with snow and animals. The wood wall would rot or be stolen. Then we need someone to tend them. You need small shelters that do not need tending, Stone alcoves with permanent wind barriers, places that keep a person alive long enough to wait out a storm, even without fire. The Eklund son considered this. Could you design such a thing? I could try. Tom Percival watched all of this from his place against the back wall. His leg was healing slowly. He could stand now, could hobble a few steps with his walking stick, but walking any distance was still beyond him. He spent his days observing Marta teach, occasionally adding a comment or correction, mostly staying silent. One evening, so after the day's visitors had left and the shelter was quiet, he asked her a question. Do you know why I came down to find you that first morning? When your axe broke? Marta was stacking wood for the night's fire. She did not look up. You said you heard stories. You wanted to see if I was clever or crazy. That is what I told you. It is not the whole truth. She looked at him then. His face was lit by firelight, the lines and creases thrown into sharp relief. I came because I was dying, Tom said, not from injury or sickness, from uselessness. A quarryman who cannot walk is not a quarryman. A mason who cannot climb is not a mason. I had knowledge and no one to give it to. You had neighbors, other men. Other men do not want to learn from a cripple. Other men have their own ways. And other men see an old Englishman with a ruined leg and think, there is a man waiting to die. Tom shifted against the wall, grimacing. You were different. You were measuring before you built. You were testing before you assumed. That told me your mind was open. I was desperate. Desperate people usually panic. You planned. That is not the same thing. Marta set another log on the stack. What are you telling me? I am telling you that what you have done here is not survival. It is creation. You took a problem no one thought could be solved, and you solved it by refusing to accept the terms everyone else accepted. Tom's voice had taken on an urgency she had not heard before. The canyon country is full of people who die because they only know one way to build, one way to heat, one way to survive. You showed them another way. That is worth more than any shelter. You showed me. I only learned what you taught. I showed you techniques. You saw connections I never imagined. The wood wall was not my idea. The coal transport to Bell's cabin was not my idea. You built on what I gave you and made something new. Tom's eyes held hers. Promise me you will not stop. Stop what? Teaching. Building, showing people that the old ways are not the only ways. Marta looked at the shelter around her, at the stone lip that had saved 7 lives, at the wood wall that was already being copied on 3 other homesteads. I promise, she said. February brought a thaw, and with the thaw came a disagreement. Tom wanted to improve the shelter's smoke ventilation. He had designed a stone-faced lip, a narrow ledge of flat rocks mortared together that would sit just below the natural overhang and channel smoke more efficiently toward the edges. The design was elegant. It would work, but it would take weeks to build, and it would require Marta to spend those weeks carrying stone instead of cutting wood. The winter is not over, Marta said. We could get another killing storm in March. I need fuel more than I need better smoke control. You need both, and the fuel can wait until the weather is certain. The weather is never certain. You taught me that. Tom's face tightened. I taught you to prepare for the worst while building for the long term. The smoke lip is long-term thinking. It will make this shelter work better for years. I do not need years. I need to survive this winter and the next one. After that, I can think about improvements. After that, you will be teaching other people. Other people will copy what you have. If they copy a shelter with bad smoke ventilation, they will build shelters that kill them. They stared at each other across the fire. Tom's jaw was set. Marta's hands were clenched. You are not my father, Marta said finally. You do not get to tell me what to do. No, I am your teacher. And sometimes a teacher has to push back when a student makes a mistake. Is this a mistake? Prioritizing survival over perfection? It is a mistake if survival becomes the only thing you care about. Survival is the floor. It is not the ceiling. Marta did not answer. She fed the fire in silence, and Tom watched her with an expression she could not read. The next morning, she started carrying stone. The smoke lip took 3 weeks to build. Tom directed the work from his place against the wall, describing angles and measurements while Marta mixed mud mortar and placed flat rocks according to his instructions. Her hands learned the weight of stone, the way different pieces fit together, the importance of a level foundation even when building something that looked irregular. By the time the lip was finished, Tom could walk again. Not well, his leg would never be what it was, but well enough to stand at the shelter's mouth and look at what they had built together. That will last, he said. Long after both of us are gone, that will still be catching smoke and channeling it away from the people sleeping below. You sound like you're saying goodbye. Tom did not answer immediately. He looked at the canyon walls, at the blue sky above the rim, at the wash where snow was melting into the first trickles of spring runoff. I'm going to the settlement, he said finally. There's a doctor there, a real one, not a horse doctor or a preacher who reads medical books. I want him to look at my leg. You will come back. If I can. If the leg holds. If the doctor does not find something worse than a twisted knee. Tom turned to face her. But if I do not come back, you need to understand something. Everything I know is now in your hands. Every technique, every principle, every lesson I learned in 20 years of building in a rough country. You are carrying it now. You decide what to do with it. Marta felt something tighten in her chest. That is too much. No, it is exactly enough. You have already proven you can take what I give you and make it better. That is what knowledge is for. It is not meant to sit in one head. It is meant to spread, to grow, to become something the original owner never imagined. He placed a hand on her shoulder. His grip was weaker than it had been, but his eyes were steady. Do not let them forget what is possible, he said, and do not let them convince you that the old ways are the only ways. He left the next morning. Marta watched him climb the switchback trail, leaning heavily on his walking stick, moving slow but steady toward the rim. She did not know it was the last time she would see him walk. Tom died in the settlement 6 weeks later. The message came with a freight hauler passing through, a scrap of paper with a few lines written in an unfamiliar hand. Thomas Percival, deceased. Heart failure. Buried in the settlement cemetery. No surviving kin. Marta read the note 3 times. Then she folded it and placed it in the pocket of her coat, next to the packet of needles Ada had given her on Christmas Day. She did not cry. She was not sure she remembered how. Instead, she walked to the fire pit and stood looking at the flat stones Tom had positioned, at the smoke lip they had built together, at every detail of the shelter that carried his knowledge in its structure. He had told her to keep teaching. He had told her not to let them forget. She picked up the axe, a new one now, bought with money earned from teaching the Eklund family, and walked toward the slope where the deadfall waited. There was work to do. The spring that followed Tom's death brought a different kind of crisis. A late winter lambing storm caught 3 families unprepared in the Upper Wash. The Eklunds, the Haslips, and a new family named Sorensen who had arrived just after Christmas and knew nothing about the canyon country's weather patterns. The storm was not as bad as January 9th. The temperature dropped only 30 degrees, not 46. The wind was strong, but not killing. The snow was heavy, but not blinding. but for families with weak shelters and green wood and newborn lambs that could not survive a single freezing night, even a moderate storm was deadly. Marta heard about it from Ada's son, the same boy who had ridden through the January blizzard, to tell her about Tom. He came at dawn, half panicked, talking fast. The Sorensen baby is sick. The Haslip ewes are dying in the field. The Eklund's grandfather shelter collapsed overnight, and 3 people are trapped. Where? Upstream, all 3 places, miles apart. Marta calculated distances in her head. She could not reach all 3. She could not help all 3, but she could organize people who could. Ride to the Merriweather place, she told the boy. Tell Ada what's happening. Tell her to bring Column and whatever warm bodies she can find. We are going to build emergency shelters. What kind of shelters? Small ones, fast ones. Windbreaks with heat pockets. The kind of thing that keeps people alive for a few hours instead of a few months. The boy rode off. Marta gathered rope, the hatchet, fire-starting supplies. She wrapped hot coals in wet sacking the way she had done the night she saved Belle's wife. But then she ran upstream toward the sound of people dying. She reached the Eklund site first. The grandfather's shelter, a smaller version of Marta's design, built against a shallow overhang with a thin wood wall, had collapsed when a section of stone flaked away from the overhang's lip. The debris had pinned 3 people inside. The old man who had replaced the grandfather they lost in January, and 2 children under the age of 8. The old man was dead. Marta knew it as soon as she saw the angle of the stone that had struck his head. The children were alive, screaming, trapped beneath a tangle of poles and brush that had been the wall. Marta cut them free. She checked them for broken bones. She wrapped them in every piece of clothing she had and left them huddled against a boulder while she assessed the damage. Wunod the shelter was destroyed. The overhang was no longer safe. The stone that had fallen suggested more might follow. But the children could not be moved far, and the storm was still dropping temperature. She built a windbreak in 20 minutes. No fancy design, no careful planning, just a V-shaped wall of dead brush and fallen poles, stacked fast and high, with a fire pit at the apex. She lit the fire with her hot coals and fed it until the flames were high enough to throw real heat. Then she left the children with the eldest Eklund son, who had arrived halfway through the construction, and ran toward the Haslip place. The Haslip ewes were dying because they had no shelter. The lambing shed Ada's wife had built was working. The animals inside were warm and dry, but the shed could only hold a dozen animals. The rest were in a makeshift pen that had seemed adequate before the storm. Marta found Haslip's wife trying to drag half-frozen lambs toward the shed, tears freezing on her face. "There is no room," the woman said. "There is no room for all of them." "Then we make room." Marta looked at the terrain. A dry wash cut through the Haslip property, running between 2 sandstone banks that rose higher than a man's head. The banks blocked wind from 2 directions. The wash floor was frozen but level. "We built a windbreak across the wash," Marta said. "The banks are already doing half the work. We just close the open ends." "With what?" "There is no wood. There's brush. There are fence poles. There's anything you can stack high enough to block wind." Marta was already moving. "Get your husband. Get anyone who can carry something. We have maybe 2 hours before those animals freeze." The windbreak went up in 90 minutes. It was ugly. It was barely functional. Brush lashed to fence poles, gaps stuffed with sacking and canvas, the whole thing threatening to collapse with every gust. But it blocked wind. And when they herded the surviving animals into the sheltered wash, the temperature inside was 10 degrees warmer than the open pen. 17 lambs had already died. 23 survived. "I will build a real shelter here when the storm passes," Haslip's wife said. "A proper one, The kind you showed me. Good, Marta said. Build two. You have the space. She ran toward the Sorensen place. The Sorensens were not dying from cold. They were dying from smoke. Their cabin was new, built just weeks before Christmas, and they had made the same mistake many newcomers made. They had sealed every crack, closed every gap, made the walls tight and draft-free, because that was what they thought survival required. What they had actually created was a tomb. When Marta arrived, the father was unconscious on the floor. The mother was barely conscious, struggling to open a door that had warped shut from moisture. The baby, the sick one Ada's son had mentioned, was silent in a cradle near the stove. Marta kicked the door until it gave. Cold air rushed in. The smoke that had been pooling at ceiling height began to clear. The mother gasped and coughed and crawled toward her baby. "Get outside," Marta said. "All of you, outside. Now." They got outside. The father regained consciousness in the cold. The baby was alive, barely, its breath shallow but present. "Your cabin has no draft," Marta said when everyone could hear her. "No air coming in means the fire eats the air you need to breathe. Then it fills the space with smoke that cannot escape." "We sealed it tight," the father said. His voice was hoarse, confused. "We thought that was right." Tight is not always right. A shelter needs to breathe. Not much, but some. Marta pointed at the cabin. "We are going to cut a vent hole near the roof peak. Tonight, before you go back inside." The vent hole took an hour to cut through frozen mud chinking. When the Sorensens went back inside, the fire was burning cleaner. The air was colder, they would need more fuel to compensate, but the smoke rose straight up and escaped instead of pooling. "You saved us," the mother said. "No, we would have died." "You would have died from not knowing," Marta said. "Now you know. Tell anyone else who's building too tight." Bell found her at the Sorensen place. He had ridden through the storm looking for her, following reports of a girl running between homesteads and building windbreaks out of nothing. By the time he reached her, the sky was clearing and the temperature was beginning to rise. "You should have let them die," he said. Marta looked at him. She was exhausted, filthy, shaking from hours of work and killing cold. She was not in the mood for Belle. "Which ones? The children, the lambs, the baby who would have choked on smoke?" "All of them. They are not your responsibility. They are my neighbors. Neighbors who will forget what you did for them in a month. Neighbors who will go back to calling you the crazy canyon girl as soon as the weather turns warm." Marta stood straighter. "Is that what you would do? Forget?" Bell's jaw tightened. He did not answer. "Your wife and daughter are alive because I carried coals through a blizzard to relight your fire," Marta said. "Your family sheltered in my ledge because your cabin could not keep them warm. You owe me your bloodline, Belle, and instead of thanking me, you are standing here telling me I should have let people die. I did not ask for your help. No, you asked to own me. That was different." Marta stepped closer. "I am not going to be owned, not by you, not by anyone. But I am going to help people who need it, because that is what Tom taught me to do. That is what this winter taught me to do. If you do not like it, stay out of my way." Bell looked at her for a long moment. His face worked through something complicated: anger, humiliation, resentment, and beneath all of it, something that might have been respect. "Cutter says you will be running this canyon within 5 years, he said finally. "Cutter does not know what I will be doing in 5 years, neither do I. But you have plans." "I have skills. Plans come later." Bell mounted his horse. He looked down at her from the saddle. "My wife says I should apologize to you for what I offered before Christmas. Is that what you are doing? Apologizing? No. He turned the horse toward the trail. But I might, eventually, if you keep proving her right. He rode away. Marta stood in the cold and watched him go. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted into the wash, swelling the dry stream into a seasonal river that ran brown with mud and debris. The cottonwoods and willows leafed out. The pinyon and juniper on the slopes above the canyon turned from gray-green to green-green as new growth pushed out. Marta turned 16 in April. No one marked the day except Ada, who brought a loaf of bread that had raisins in it. "You are a woman now," Ada said, "by any measure that matters." "I was a woman when my father pushed me out the door," Marta said. "Age does not have anything to do with it." "No, it does not." They sat at the mouth of the overhang and watched the river run. The wood wall was thin now. Marta had burned most of her fuel through the winter, but the skeleton of the structure remained. The smoke-lip Tom had helped her build still channeled smoke away from the sleeping area. The cold air trench still kept dense air from pooling on the floor. "Tom would be proud of what you did during the lambing storm," Ada said. "Tom would tell me I moved too fast, that I did not plan enough." "Tom would be wrong. Sometimes you have to move fast. Sometimes planning is a luxury you cannot afford." Marta picked at a piece of bark from one of the wall logs. "He told me not to let them forget what is possible. I do not know what that means." "It means keep teaching, keep building, keep showing people that they have choices they did not know they had. I am one girl. I cannot teach everyone." "Then teach some people. Those people will teach others. That is how knowledge spreads." Ada stood up. "When you are ready, bring what you know to my place. We are building a storm shelter for the lambing ewes." "I want you to design it." "I have never designed anything for someone else." "Then this will be your first time." The storm shelter at the Merriweather place took 2 weeks to build. Marta designed it differently from her own shelter. The Merriweathers had no natural overhang, no ready-made stone roof to work with. Instead, they had a steep hillside that faced southeast, with a sandstone outcrop at the base that rose 8 feet above the pasture. "We build into the hill," Marta told Ada and Colum on the first morning. "The stone becomes our back wall. The hill becomes our roof. We dig a pocket into the slope, brace it with timber, and close the front with a wood wall like mine." "A dugout," Colum said. "Half dugout, half lean-to. The earth above holds heat. The stone behind blocks wind. The wood wall stores fuel and closes the mouth." Marta traced lines in the dirt with a stick. "We build it large enough for 20 ewes. That means the volume is bigger than my shelter, which means we need more fire, which means we need a better draft system." "How do you build a better draft?" "We angle the entrance. Wind coming from the northwest hits the wood wall at an angle instead of straight on. That reduces pressure. Then we cut a vent channel through the earth at the back, running uphill. Warm air rises through the channel. Cold air enters through gaps in the wood wall. The fire draws from the cold air and feeds the warm air out." Colum looked at the lines she had drawn. "You figured this out yourself?" "Tom taught me the principles. I'm applying them to a new problem." They broke ground that afternoon. What the digging was hard, harder than Marta had expected. The hillside was packed clay mixed with rock, resistant to shovels, stubborn under picks. Colum's sons helped, and neighbors who had heard about the project came to contribute labor in exchange for watching the design take shape. By the end of the first week, the pocket was dug. By the end of the second week, the timber bracing was in place, and the wood wall was rising across the entrance. The Merriweather storm shelter was finished on a warm afternoon in late April. Ada walked through the entrance and stood in the dim space, looking at the stone wall behind her, the earth ceiling above, the angled opening that softened the light. "It feels like being held," she said. "It feels like being protected," Marta said. That is what shelter should feel like." Word spread faster after the Merryweather shelter went up. People who had heard stories about the Canyon Girl and her rock ledge now had something else to talk about. A storm shelter that could be built anywhere with a hill and some timber. A shelter that did not require a natural overhang. A shelter that ordinary people could construct with ordinary tools. Requests came from upstream and downstream, from the settlement and from homesteads a day's ride away. Some people wanted Marta to design shelters for them. Some wanted her to supervise construction. Some just wanted to watch her work so they could copy her methods. She could not help everyone. There were not enough hours in the day, not enough weeks in the year, but she could teach the people who came, and those people could teach others. By summer, 3 more storm shelters had been built in the canyon country. By autumn, there were 8. By the following winter, the number had grown to 15. Not all of them worked perfectly. Some had draft problems. Some had water intrusion. One collapsed during a heavy snow because the builder had skimped on timber bracing. Marta visited each failure, studied what had gone wrong, and added the lesson to her teaching. "Every mistake teaches something," she told a family whose shelter had flooded during spring runoff. "The mistake is not the failure. The failure is not learning from it." Bell's final reckoning came in the autumn of 1884. He had spent the summer trying to capitalize on the storm shelter movement. He offered canyon wintering services to newcomers. They were charging money for advice he had mocked a year earlier. He built shelters for 2 families using techniques he had watched Marta demonstrate. Both shelters had problems. The first was built too deep without adequate venting. The family that used it nearly suffocated during a late September storm when the fire consumed all the available air. Marta arrived in time to cut a vent hole and revive the father, who had lost consciousness near the entrance. The second shelter's wood wall was improperly stacked. Flat courses instead of angled ones. Wind found the gaps. The family inside burned through their entire fuel supply in a single night trying to stay warm. After the second failure, Cutter called a meeting at the trading post. 15 people attended, including Bell, including Marta, but including Ada and Colum, and the Eklund family and the Haslips. Cutter stood at the front of the room, his face as unreadable as ever. 2 families almost died this month because of bad shelter construction, Cutter said. Both shelters were built by the same man. Both shelters had the same problems, poor venting and poor stacking. Bell's face reddened. "I built what I saw." "You built what you thought you saw. You did not understand what you were copying." Cutter looked at Marta. "The girl who survived the January storm has been teaching people for months. Not one of her students has built a shelter that failed. She is a child. She is a builder. She has proven it. You have proven the opposite." Bell stood up. His hands were clenched at his sides. "You are taking her side because Cutter blood sticks together? Because you old men see something in her that flatters your pride?" "I'm taking her side because she is right, and you are wrong. That's the only side that matters in canyon country." Cutter turned to face the room. "From now on, anyone who wants to build a storm shelter comes to the Hoagland girl first. She will teach you or she will tell you where to find someone she has already taught. Anyone who builds without that knowledge does so at their own risk." "You cannot enforce that," Bell said. "I am not enforcing anything. I am telling people the truth. They can decide what to do with it." Bell looked around the room. He saw faces that had once supported him, or at least tolerated him. He saw those same faces looking away, looking down, looking at Marta. "This is not finished," he said. "Yes," Cutter replied. It is. The following week, Belle's wife came to Marta's Overhang alone. She was a thin woman, worn down by hard years and harder pregnancies. She carried the infant daughter who had been born during the January storm, the child Marta had helped save. "He will not apologize," Belle's wife said. "He does not know how." "I do not need his apology." "No, but you need to know that he understands." The woman shifted the baby on her hip. "After the meeting, he went home and tore down the wall on our cabin, the one he built wrong last winter, the one that failed during the storm. He rebuilt it using the methods you showed people: angled courses, tight gaps, a proper draft channel. He could have asked me to check his work. He could have, but that would mean admitting he needed help." The woman almost smiled. "Men are strange creatures. They would rather suffer in silence than admit they were wrong." "And you? What do you want?" "I want my children to survive. I want my husband to stop being too proud to learn." The woman looked at the shelter around her, at the stone lip, the wood wall, the fire pit with its flat stones. "I want what you have, knowledge that protects people." Marta studied her for a long moment. "Bring your husband here tomorrow. Tell him I will teach him properly this time. Tell him there will be no charge and no conditions. Tell him the only thing I ask is that he listen. He will not come. Then tell him his wife and daughter will come without him. Tell him they will learn what he refuses to learn. Tell him that in 5 years his children will know more about surviving in this country than he does." The woman's eyes widened. Then she nodded. Belle came the next morning. He did not apologize. He did not speak at all for the first hour, but he watched. He listened. He took the pieces of wood Marta handed him and stacked them the way she showed him. By the end of the day, he had rebuilt a section of her wood wall with his own hands. The courses were angled. The gaps were tight. The work was acceptable. "You learn fast when you stop fighting," Marta said. Belle looked at the wall he had built. Something in his expression shifted. Not warmth, not gratitude, but acknowledgement. "You are better at this than I am," he said. The words seemed to cost him everything he had. "Yes," Marta said, "I am." Jonas Iverson arrived in the Canyon Country in the spring of 1885. He was 23 years old, a mule skinner who hauled freight between the settlements and the mining camps farther west. He had heard stories about the storm shelter spreading through the Canyon Country, about the girl who had started it all with a rock overhang and a wood wall. He did not come looking for Marta. He came looking for work. The lambing storm of '85 was mild compared to previous years, but it still caught some families unprepared. Jonas was hauling supplies upstream when the weather turned, and he ended up sheltering with the Eklund family in one of the emergency stations Marta had helped them build along the trail. "The girl designed this?" he asked the eldest Eklund son. "Marta Hogland, she lives in the lower canyon. You built the first one under a rock ledge 3 winters ago. A girl built this. A girl who knows more about surviving canyon winters than anyone else in the territory. If you are smart, you will meet her before you leave." Jonas met her 2 days later. She was restacking the wood wall at her overhang when he rode down the switchback trail. She did not look up when he dismounted. She did not acknowledge him until he had stood watching for nearly 5 minutes. "You are the mule skinner," she said finally. "Jonas Iverson. I sheltered with the Eklunds during the storm." "I know. They sent word." She set another log in place. "What do you want?" "To understand how this works." Marta stopped working. She looked at him for the first time. Really looked. He was tall, broad-shouldered, none with hands that showed calluses from rope work and reins. His face was weather-worn but not hard. His eyes were curious rather than skeptical. Most people who come here want me to teach them, she said. They want to copy what I have built. I do not want to copy anything. I want to understand the principles. The Eklund shelter kept me alive, but I do not know why. I want to know why. Marta considered this. Most visitors wanted techniques. This one wanted understanding. Sit down, she said. This will take a while. Jonas stayed 3 weeks. He did not ask permission to stay. He simply returned each day, bringing small gifts, a coil of good rope, a bag of dried apples, a whetstone for sharpening axes. In exchange, Marta talked. She explained the principles Tom had taught her, and she explained the principles she had discovered on her own. She walked him through the design of her shelter, piece by piece, until he understood not just what she had built, but why she had built it that way. He asked questions no one else had asked. Why does the fire go near the mouth instead of the back? Because smoke rises. If the fire is at the back, smoke fills the shelter before it can escape. If the fire is near the mouth, smoke rises past the wood wall and out through the gap at the top. But the heat goes out with the smoke. Some of it, but heat also radiates. The stone behind me absorbs heat from the fire and releases it slowly. The wall in front reflects heat back toward the sleeper. The fire is a source. The shelter is a container. What matters is how much of the source stays in the container. Jonas nodded slowly. The Eklund shelter felt warmer than it should have. Warmer than a space that size should feel with a fire that small. Because it was designed to be a container, not just a box. They were sitting at the mouth of the overhang, watching the sun set over the canyon rim. The light was gold and red, catching the sandstone walls and turning them into something that looked alive. You think about this all the time, Jonas said. Heat and cold and containers. You see the world differently than most people. I see the world the way it is. Most people see the world the way they want it to be. Is that something Tom taught you? That is something the canyon taught me. Tom just gave me the words for it. Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm leaving tomorrow. One of the freight company wants me in the western camps by the end of the month. I know. I would like to come back when the hauling season ends. Marta looked at him. His face was serious, earnest, without the calculation she had learned to expect from men who wanted something from her. Why? Because I have never met anyone who thinks the way you do. Because I want to understand more. Because... He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. Because I think there are things I could help with. Hauling, building, the heavy work you cannot do alone. I have managed alone for 2 years. I know, but you do not have to. Marta did not answer immediately. She looked at the shelter around her, at the wood wall, and the stone lip and the fire pit where she had kept herself alive through 2 winters. She thought about Tom, who had helped her when she needed it most. She thought about Ada, who had brought supplies and asked for nothing but knowledge in return. Come back in the autumn, she said finally. Bring tools, bring rope, bring whatever the freight company does not need. And then we will see what you are made of. Jonas returned in October of 1885. He brought a mule loaded with supplies, seasoned poles, good rope, a forge-sharpened axe, a bag of iron nails. He brought his own hands, which knew how to lift and carry and build. He did not try to take over. He did not try to improve on what Marta had designed. He asked questions, listened to answers, and did the work she assigned him. They built a second shelter that autumn, not under the overhang, but 50 yards downstream, against a different rock face. It was a test, Marta explained. A test of whether the principles she had learned could be applied in a new location by someone who had not designed the original. Jonas built the shelter with Marta watching. She corrected him when he made mistakes. She praised him when he applied principles correctly without being told. By the time the first snow fell, the second shelter was complete, smaller than the overhang, but functional, a place where travelers could stop, where stranded families could survive. "You build well," Marta said on the day the second shelter was finished. "I had a good teacher." "Tom was a good teacher. I'm still learning how to teach." "Then we are both still learning." They stood at the mouth of the new shelter, looking at the work they had done together. The wood wall was tight. The fire pit was properly positioned. The draft channel was cut and vented. "Will you stay for the winter?" Marta asked. Jonas looked at her. "Is that what you want?" "I am asking what you want." "I want to stay. I want to build more shelters. I want to learn everything you know and help you teach it to others." He paused. "I want to be useful, not just to the freight company, to something that matters." Marta nodded slowly. "Then stay." They married in the spring of 1887. The ceremony was small. Ada and Colum stood as witnesses, and a traveling preacher spoke the words. There was no church, no reception, no fuss, just two people who had decided that their work was better done together than apart. They built a proper house that year. Not under the overhang that remained a shelter for travelers in emergencies, but higher up the slope, where the ground was level and the view stretched across the canyon toward the eastern rim. The house had timber walls and a proper roof and a stove that burned clean. It had 2 rooms that became 3, then 4 as children arrived. Their first daughter was born in 1888. They named her after Marta's mother. Their first son was born in 1890. They named him Thomas, after the man who had taught Marta everything she knew about building. 2 more children followed, another daughter, another son, filling the house with noise and motion, and the endless work of raising small humans in a place that still tried to kill people every winter. Marta kept teaching. She designed 14 more storm shelters in the years after her marriage. She trained a dozen students who went on to build shelters of their own. She wrote down the principles Tom had taught her, scratching them onto pages that Jonas bound together into a book that traveled from homestead to homestead, copied and recopied until the original was worn to fragments. The canyon country changed around her. More families arrived. More buildings went up. The trails became roads. The trading post became a town. But the winters did not change. The cold still came every year, fierce and patient, looking for anyone who was not prepared. And every winter, Marta's shelters kept people alive. She grew old in the canyon. By 1895, her hands had the same calluses they had earned at 15, thickened and layered by decades of work. Then her face had lines that mapped every storm she had survived, every lesson she had learned. Jonas died in 1903, kicked by a mule he had been loading for a freight run. The injury did not kill him immediately. He lingered for 3 days, talking to Marta about the work they had done, the shelters they had built, the children they had raised. "You gave me a life that mattered," he said near the end. "I never thanked you for that." "You did not need to thank me. You lived it." She buried him on the slope above the house, where he could see the canyon stretching east toward the rim. She marked the grave with stones she had carried herself, one for every year they had been married. The children were grown by then, scattered across the territory. The oldest daughter had married a rancher upstream. The oldest son had gone east to study engineering. The younger ones were building lives of their own, carrying pieces of what Marta had taught them into places she would never see. She kept living in the canyon. She kept teaching anyone who came to learn. She kept walking down to the overhang on cold mornings to check that the shelter was ready for anyone who might need it. The last winter she saw clearly was 1912. A storm blew through in January, not as bad as the storm of 1884, but bad enough. The temperature dropped 35 degrees in half a day. Snow piled against the wood walls of shelters across the canyon country. Marta's original overhang sheltered a family of 4 that night. Travelers who had been caught on the trail, who had followed the markers that Jonas had placed years earlier, who had stumbled through the entry gap and found warmth waiting for them. She met them the next morning, walking down from her house to check on the shelter the way she had done for 30 years. "You are Marta Haugland," the father said. His voice was hoarse from cold. "I am. The woman who built this, who taught people how to survive. I am the woman who learned how to survive and did not keep it to myself." The family stayed 3 days, waiting for the trails to clear. When they left, they carried knowledge with them: how to stack wood, how to position fire, how to read wind and weather and stone. They carried it to wherever they were going, and from there it would spread further. That was how knowledge worked. It did not stay in one place. It grew. By the time Marta Haugland died in 1918, at least 30 households in the canyon country had some version of her storm shelter design built into their properties. The spread had moved beyond her original students, beyond the people she had taught directly, into a second generation who learned from the book Jonas had bound together and the teachers Marta had trained. The detail that would have pleased her most: people had stopped thinking of rock overhangs as dead space and started treating them as ready-made structure, as starting points rather than endings. She lived most of her adult life above the same wash where her father had sent her to die. In later years, she was known less for the scandal of being cast out than for the practical way she could stand in a canyon, pinch ash between finger and thumb, and tell a family where their heat would leak. While she died in her sleep during a January cold snap, with 3 grandchildren in the house, and a fire burning clean in the stove she and Jonas had installed 30 years before. They found her in the morning, face peaceful, hands folded on her chest, still wearing the wedding ring Jonas had made from a silver coin. Return to it now. January 9th, 1884. Blue-black sky. Wind howling through the canyon like something hunting. Temperature dropping 46 degrees in a single day, fast enough to freeze standing water before dark. Ephraim Cutter had looked at the overhang and delivered his verdict. That ledge will kill you cleaner than the open. When the first hard norther comes, they will scrape you out frozen by morning. But they did not scrape her out. They found her stacking wood at dawn, the smoke rising clean against the stone lip, 7 people alive in a space built for one. They found her teaching Belle how to stack a wall. They found her running through blizzards to save lambs and children and families who did not know what she knew. The cold kept coming. It came every winter for 35 years, but it never found Marta Haugland first again.